Hey everyone, welcome back. This is episode 2 in the My Favorite Norns script series. Today's script is Worms by Andrew C.S. Worms is described as dual stereo time wigglers slash echo loopers. Its main function is as a looper or delay. This script is incredibly deep and has a ton of controls to go through. I'm going to do my best to cover everything, but I'm sure there will be some things I'll miss. If you want to dig deeper on your own, there are some great resources on GitHub and the lines thread for this script, which I'll link in the video description. I'm going to start with the controls that are accessible from the main display. First off, you switch between the different pages with encoder 1. So I'm going to start with the page labeled V, which I'm assuming is for volume. The V page displays the two buffers, the volume of the two buffers, and the record arm controls. Encoder 2 controls the volume of buffer 1. Encoder 3 controls the volume of buffer 2. Button 2 will record arm buffer 1, and button 3 will record arm buffer 2. If you hold the shift key, the menu starts displaying the phase separation and skew controls for buffer 1, as well as the res controls for buffer 1 and 2. Phase separation will offset the playback of the two buffers in relation to each other. Skew is similar, except instead of offsetting the playback, it offsets the length of each buffer. If you trigger the res control, it will set the playhead back to 0. If you've recorded into the buffers, you can hold the two record buttons and release them and it'll clear the buffers. The second page is labeled O, which I'm assuming is for old and shows the old controls as well as the record arm controls. Encoder 2 controls the old amount of buffer 1. Encoder 3 controls the old amount of buffer 2. Button 1 again record arms buffer 1, and button 2 record arms buffer 2. Old sets the overdub / delay feedback level. If you're using the buffers as loopers, a value of 1 will let you do sound on sound looping. If you're using the buffers as a delay, then a value of 1 will repeat into overdub territory. Lower values affect the buffers differently depending on whether you're using them as loopers or as a delay. If they're acting as loopers, a lower value will decrease the volume of the recorded signal each pass until it's inaudible. If they're acting as a delay, then old is basically a dry or wet control. Holding shift on the O page brings up the phase control for buffer 2 as well as tap tempo for both buffers. The next page is the B page. I think it's probably for bend. This page displays the bend and wiggle controls and the speed controls for buffer 2. Encoder 2 sets the bend value, and encoder 3 sets the wiggle amount. Button 2 halves the playback speed of buffer 2, and button 3 doubles the playback speed. Bend will control the playback rate of buffer 1. 1 is at normal speed, and 2 is at double speed. Wiggle is a slow LFO that is routed to the pitch of both buffers. The higher the value, the more pitch modulation will occur. If you push both buttons at the same time, the buffer is reversed, and if you hold a button before releasing, the speed change will glide instead of being instantaneous. If you hold shift, you'll see the wiggle time controls. Wiggle rate is the speed of the wiggle LFO, and TP is transposition by semitones. The fourth page is the S page. This displays the start and end time of buffer 1 and the speed controls for buffer 1. Encoder 2 controls the start time. Encoder 3 controls the end time. Button 2 will have the playback speed of buffer 1, and button 3 will double it. Holding shift on this page will display the same controls except for buffer 2. The next page is the buffer routing page. This page controls the order the buffers flow and which buffer each worm will write into. By default, buffer 1 is a delay and buffer 2 is a looper, and buffer 1 feeds buffer 2. You can use encoder 2 to increase or decrease the amount of signal from worm 1 that is sent to buffer 2, and encoder 3 to do the same for worm 2 to buffer 1. Button 2 will set the buffer for worm 1, either 1 or 2, and button 3 will set the worm for buffer 2. Holding shift on this page brings up pan controls, overdub mode for worm 1, and aliasing. The pan parameter controls the input pan for each worm. The different overdub modes are either feedback, ping pong, or overdub. Ping pong and feedback are for using worms as a delay, and overdub is for using it as a looper. Aliasing is by default on, but if you turn it off, it will disable anti-aliasing for both record heads. The final page is the filter page. This has all the filter controls for both buffers. Encoder 2 controls the filter cutoff. and encoder 3 controls the resonance. Buttons 2 and 3 are used to cycle through the different types of filters for worm 1. Dry means the filter is off, LP is low pass, HP is high pass, and BP is band pass. Holding shift brings up the filter controls for worm 2, with all of the controls being the same. Before I go any further, I want to show you what this sounds like. I have the OP1 connected off screen. I'm going to play a single note into buffer 1. So this is the old controls, this is the volume control. Bend, wiggle. This is the start and end controls and playback speed. And then filter. Now if we record arm buffer 2, most of the parameters are available from the scripts menu, but there are a few additional things we can access from the parameters menu. First thing is the input routing controls. This allows you to change the behavior of the inputs. The options are stereo, mono, and 2 times mono, which will treat the left and right inputs as 2 independent mono channels and send them to worm 1 and worm 2 respectively. You can also access the output pane controls for worm 1 and worm 2 here. The only other things are the transposition controls for buffer 1 and the overdub controls for buffer 2, as well as crow controls, but that's not something I'm really familiar with. I don't ever really use crow. This is a script that greatly benefits from Midi mapping. I've done a lot of experimenting with this. One of the most interesting things I've found is that you can map the transposition controls to specific buttons and turn worms into almost a mellotron. I have a video of this up on my Instagram, which I'll link in the video description. When I'm MIDI mapping, I'll usually control the volume to make that easier to access of both buffers, and transposition, you can set, like I said about the mellotron example, you can set buttons to target specific values. So you can pitch shift the buffer by various increments, whatever you want to set it to. So I like to have access to that. And then the octave controls, because it is kind of, it's not ideal to have to switch between the different menu pages to access the direction and octave controls for the 2 different buffers. And occasionally I'll also map the pan and filter controls as well. Worms is an incredibly deep script, and there's so many possibilities with it. I feel like every time I use it, I learn something new. I even learned a couple new things while doing the research for this video. I think part of the appeal to me is that I don't have it 100% figured out, and that kind of leads to some interesting discoveries and surprises. If you want to see more of this script in action, Dueling Ants has a great video that I'll link down below as well. That about wraps it up. I hope this video can pull back the curtain a bit on this incredibly complex and powerful script. As always, thank you for watching. If you have any topic requests, leave a comment below. I'll see you next week.